Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Lulu. Lulu, thank you so much for taking the time.
Wonderful to be here, Cameron.
Yeah, of course. So I'd like to kick things off with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Hunan in southern China in a hospital that my grandfather ran.
Wow.
And when I was about 5 years old, we immigrated to Northern California, the Bay Area, and I started kindergarten not speaking a word of English. It was definitely trial by fire and learn how to assimilate quickly. And that was basically the story of my childhood.
Wow. So I'm curious as that transition point then. What was life growing up? What were some of your interests growing up as a kid, and what are some of those passions?
Yeah, honestly, I think those first couple of months, I still have very vivid memories of just really being observant of what others around me were doing because I didn't speak the language. I didn't even know how to raise my hand and ask to go to the bathroom and what is nap time and what is recess and all those things. So I think it cultivated a sense of natural curiosity within me and just being very observant of the world around me and social interactions and how we as human beings behave in groups and what are some of those patterns of behavior. And as a kid, I think I had really diverse interests from swimming and dance to drawing, and I love to read. My parents actually did not believe in having cable TV. So in my spare time, without Nickelodeon or MTV, I really
Yeah,
just sat at home and read a lot. And I loved the ability of books to take us to different places around the world and throughout different time periods.
I love it. Awesome. So getting into some of your schooling years and getting into college, I saw a couple of different colleges you might have attended, and I saw you went to Wharton as well. What did you go study, and then also where did you finish out in maybe your undergrad?
Yeah. So in undergrad, I actually thought, as an immigrant child, the safest career is to kind of go into medicine or law. I can't stand the sight of blood. So I went
Yeah.
undergrad, double majoring in political science and art history, thinking I would become a lawyer. And in college, I even volunteered with the nation's largest nonprofit pro bono legal association. I've always been a huge advocate and believer in supporting and advancing the economic interests of women, minorities, and so that's a lot of what my pro bono volunteering work was. And I remember at the time, the lawyer that I worked with, she said, if you really enjoy this pro bono work, you should not go to law school because you're going to come out of law school with so much debt to pay off that you'll
Yeah.
never get to do this work. So she was like, if this is what your passion is, then go into business or find some other
Yeah.
avenue of doing work for social good. So that advice really resonated with me. And I started off, I think, immediately after undergrad. I actually ended up living in Beijing. Even though I was born in China, I never spent much of my adult life there. And this was around the time that Beijing was preparing for the Olympics. And so
Wow.
I joke that straight out of college was my best job that I didn't get paid for because I was actually volunteering for the 2008 Olympics
Wow.
and working in the International Media Center. So that was just really awesome, meeting
Mm.
delegations from all over the world. And I was one of the only native English speakers there. So
Mm.
really just giving VIP tours, kind of serving as that cultural divide between the Western world and the Eastern world. And I
Mhm.
really loved that role. And I
Yeah.
did some work while I was in Beijing in PR and brand management. And while I really loved that work, I always thought that brand management and PR felt a little bit like lipstick on a pig if you
Mm.
didn't have the organization and the employees and the leaders really bought into what a brand was supposed to stand for and the
Mm.
experience it was supposed to deliver. So that's when I went back to school. I moved to New York in 2008 and I did a master's in social organizational psychology. And I
Mm.
focused on this aspect of behavioral change. So, really got me interested. What motivates human beings to change? Why
Yeah.
is change so hard? And how do we break it down into smaller
Mm.
steps for people to get started?
I love it. So this transition from Beijing to New York then, post graduation, that MBA, what did that look like then? What avenue did you end up jumping to?
Yeah. So then I ended up, after finishing that master's, I went into management consulting. It was a lot of consulting to these large Fortune 500 organizations that oftentimes had very dysfunctional cultures.
Yeah.
They were about to implement some big strategies, some big change, but everyone was, up in arms, resistant. Leaders were all over the place. They were losing their best employees, and it was just kind of like a mess.
Mm.
And after a couple of years of doing that, I was getting a little burnt out, quite frankly, from being in
Yeah.
all these toxic environments. I was actually recruited to Saks Fifth Avenue to run, at the time, omni-channel strategy. So how do we take all the data that we're collecting across shoppers and transactions and personalize the customer experience? And I was
Mm.
also building out this group called the Change Management Center of Excellence. Like, there was so much change affecting the retail industry. How can we
Mm.
build an organization that's more resilient to change and resilient to what's coming our way?
Yeah.
And long story short, 6 months into joining Saks got acquired, and I thought I was going to get laid off and go back to
Mm.
consulting.
Yeah.
But instead, I got promoted into an even bigger role. And I ended up, my gosh, Cameron, I was
Wow.
working like 70, 80 hours a week, drinking 3 coffees a day, skipping lunch, not sleeping well. And
Mm.
my entire health just broke down. I had chronic migraines, bloating, hormonal acne. There were days when I was so exhausted on the weekends, I couldn't get out of bed. It was
Mm.
awful.
Wow. I don't know if you're allowed to like kind of share that transition, but I find a lot of trends, and I mean it's very public that whenever something a company gets acquired, the culture is something that's very fragile. So what was that shift? That I mean, all of a sudden you got this promotion and you just started working crazy hours at the transition of the acquisition.
Yeah.
What culture shift did you see there?
I mean, it's interesting. Depending on where you're looking at the stats, people estimate that 70-90% of mergers and acquisitions fail.
Yeah.
And they fail to achieve the original stated business case. Because
Mm.
oftentimes you have like investment bankers and folks coming in to estimate, oh, if this company acquires this company or these two companies merge, you can get like this hundreds of millions of dollars and like savings or synergies. And then
Yeah.
after they prepare the deck, the transaction happens. Those people are long gone, and you have like a new team coming in to try to like go after those savings. So you
Yes.
never really end up getting the full savings or the synergies. And I think that's what contributes to a lot of the stress of these
Mm.
acquisitions and integrations, because the original goals were
Yeah.
just unachievable and or unrealistic at the onset. So then in
Mm.
integration, you're trying to go after these like big audacious numbers that are just
Mm.
really unachievable, and that creates a lot of stress and tension. And I often joke that a lot of these M&A environments are almost like Game of Thrones meets House of Cards.
Yeah.
Everyone like senses threat. And when our bodies sense that there's threat in the environment, it sends us into a state of fight or flight in our
Mm.
nervous system. And so we end up engaging in very almost like conflict prone, very short-sighted behaviors. And it's
Mm.
kind of, these very natural tendencies within us as mammals.
Yeah. So this is like the segue into Alex. If you can kind of share, so I know your experiences with problems with promotion and how busy work has been getting. Also, this transition into your own career pursuits. Where does the inspiration and idea come to then start Elix at this point?
Yeah, well, so at this point, I'm also about to get married. So
Mm.
I'm engaged to my long term partner. We're planning our wedding. Work is crazy.
Yeah.
And I decide to actually go off hormonal contraceptive birth control. I've been on it for many years. I hated the way it made me feel. And there's a lot of studies about the side effects of birth control on women, how it leads to a lot of feelings of anxiousness, weight fluctuations, headaches, issues with acne, and so forth. But when I
Mm.
went off the pill, I think all of my stress symptoms and my burnout symptoms just manifested itself in my period, and it came back with a vengeance. And that's
Mm.
when my symptoms were even worse. And, it all kind of culminated. And there was this big meeting I was supposed to be at, a board meeting to present this large, like, integration plan I've been working on for several weeks. And instead of, and I was up for promotion too. So it was really important that I be at that meeting with senior leadership, present the strategy, the plan. And that
Mm.
morning, I woke up my period started and I just had these like sharp stabbing pains in my stomach. And I literally was like laying on my bathroom floor for 20 minutes, like, oh my God, I can't move. I
Oh,
can't make
wow.
it to work. And then I was like, I can't tell my boss this because of my period. Like, what are they going to think of me? So
Yeah.
I remember calling in and saying like, must have ate something bad, had horrible stomach flu. Don't know what happened. So sorry, couldn't make it. And
Yeah.
I was so embarrassed in that moment because I prided myself in being this like ambitious,
Mm.
hardworking, high achieving person. And I realized I'm not alone. Like up to 90% of women experience some type of severe PMS hormonal imbalance at some point in our lives.
Mm.
And the research shows that 40 to 50% of us have called in sick to work. But yet, because periods are still so stigmatized, when we call in sick to work, we usually give a different excuse that's more socially acceptable, like I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. I'm curious at that time. I mean, with that status as well, what was the reaction from work? I mean, that's a huge presentation, a lot of stress on yourself going on.
Yeah, so they were definitely surprised, but my boss had been briefed on the plan, what I was presenting. So,
Mm.
obviously she could have the conversation and she got the green light and we could move forward in implementation. So everything ended up working out well.
Good.
My inner critic, I was just so tough on myself.
Mm.
In that very moment. And I think
Yeah.
that's very common, right? Like we all kind of deal with this like inner critic voice
Mm.
inside our heads.
Yeah. For sure. At this point, then, I'm curious if you're looking for maybe a resolution, and that's the idea pops in. You conducted many different trials, clinical trials. I'm curious at this point, what was it that you wanted to lean onto? Traditional Chinese medicine, and why did that pop in mind?
Yeah, so I ended up going to several different gynecologists to see if there was something that they could give me to help with my symptoms. And it
Hmm.
seemed like the only solution they could offer was either antidepressants for my mood swings or birth control to regulate my hormones and my period symptoms. And I was like, is there nothing else that's more natural, less invasive, with less side effects? And that was kind of when I found my way back to Chinese medicine. So much of Chinese medicine is about healing at the root cause of conditions and naturally bring your body back to balance with herbs, with food therapy, with how you're caring for yourself and your emotional health. Chinese medicine was one of the first bodies of medicine, like 2000 years ago, to write about the mind, body, spirit alignment and how mental health and emotional well-being is critical to long-term health. And when we have unresolved emotions, so stress, frustration, anger, this could actually lead to physical symptoms and pain.
Yeah.
Like how often have you experienced during a stressful time? It's like all of a sudden your neck hurts, your shoulders are
Yeah,
tense, you have back pain. Like
for
where did
sure.
this come from? And at the same time, you're stressed.
For sure. No, for sure. At that point, then, I know it took about a year of R&D and at this time. Where did you
Yeah.
look for maybe formulations, et cetera, moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it took me about a year from the time that I found my way back to Chinese medicine to think like, okay, maybe there's a viable business here because all my girlfriends at Saks were curious about Chinese herbs and they wanted to take it. But the
Mm.
reason why Chinese medicine works so well for women's health and just chronic care is when it's personalized. So then we spent about 2 years. I ended up going back to business school and incubating the idea and spent about 2 years looking at, okay, if we were to bring the process of seeing an herbal practitioner online, what are the questions that we would ask? And what are the different root causes, patterns, if you will, of imbalances that we could design organic herbal formulas for. So
Mm.
it was kind of like the first part of R&D was building our online health assessment, which today has 50 to 60 different questions, asks about your symptom, diet, lifestyle, and then based on your pattern of condition, there's particular different root causes in Chinese medicine. And then based on that root cause, there's different pattern or different organic formulas that are known via clinical research to support those patterns.
Mm.
And then we're very proud. Fast forward today, we've launched 2 independent clinical studies showing just the efficacy of this approach of
Mm.
personalized herbal care.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So when you look to roll out the first product line, I'm curious for manufacturing side of things. Where did you look for that? So sourcing your formula, and then specifically you look for the manufacturer.
Oh my gosh, that was so hard.
Yeah.
And the first thing is, I think the reason why supplements get a bad rep is because it is largely unregulated. And so I think there's a lot of education that's needed for the consumer on how do you even choose a quality supplement. And so even before manufacturing, it kind of starts with ingredient sourcing. Like we only source certified organic, raw, dried herbs or wild harvested, which means that the farm basically uses organic practices, but they either don't have the funding or they're in a region where it's very prohibitively difficult to get that certification. But
Yeah.
then we triple test all of our ingredients. So we test it when we're sourcing it at the source, and then each batch when it arrives into our manufacturing facility. And before we even scaled manufacturing, we conducted a beta where I was personally sourcing the herbs, like
Wow.
literally going through global indexes of like organic farms. And, we use dozens of different herbs to create our formula. So that was like, that took several months of like,
Yeah.
okay, I want, like this is reishi mushroom.
Wow.
I want to source organic certified reishi. Like, who are all the global like farms that I could get this from? Or I want organic like Angelica sinensis, which is like a different herb, or this is like, like a ginseng.
Yeah.
So in beta, I was actually personally sourcing all of this, and we had a commercial kitchen where we were boiling down all the herbs because having grown up with Chinese medicine, it was really important that we stayed as close to this idea of food as thy medicine as possible. And, growing up, whenever I was sick, my grandparents would make me like a soup or stew or some type of tea. And in the food form, rather than pills and powders, it's actually easier for our bodies to absorb and break down the nutrients. And so that was actually really, really important. So it was almost like I created the ideal sourcing and manufacturing method when we were in beta, and also tested it on myself. Friends and family. So very grateful to those early beta testers. And then it was about looking for a manufacturing partner who could replicate what we had created. And that kind of didn't exist. Like we had to collaborate with different folks to try to figure out what was the right path to bring this to scale.
Yeah, so coming from that beta stage and going into kind of producing at the manufacturer level, what did that relationship look like carrying over like some of the farmers and where you're sourcing natural herbs and getting those to the manufacturer? What did that relationship look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as we've grown, in the early days, it was really about selling the vision. Like our vision for Elix is to build the first East meets West, science meets holistic online community and platform where people can learn, can get a pattern diagnosis, can learn about what that means, can have access to high quality organic herbs, but also the diet, the lifestyle, the educational component. From the early days, I knew we would want to build out some type of care and coaching platform, but it took us time to get there. We actually just launched our coaching aspect of our platform last year. But so from day one, it was like about this bigger vision of how do we help people heal holistically at the root with these various different practices. And it was a lot of talking to different partners before we actually had the size and scale to support their regular minimum order quantities or their normal business practices. But it was about getting them on board with the vision and that this needed to exist and then begging them to help us essentially.
Yeah, I love it. At launch, what do you find that works well for marketing, for example? So you mentioned a strong stat that a lot of females they'll convert up, like for example, high stress levels, they'll convert up with work with something else. So at launch, what marketing worked well for the new product?
Yeah, it was a lot of leaning into education, and that just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal. And I remember we launched with a lot of stats, like how 90% of women experience PMS and hormonal imbalances, but this whole world of menstrual cycle and hormone health receives less funding than erectile dysfunction. which only affects 10 to 20% of men. So it's just kind of highlighting these inequities, or how the US leads developed nations of the world in the number of women who are getting hysterectomies. Like literally our reproductive organs are getting surgically removed due to conditions of undiagnosable pain. It's like, that is wild. Like we can't figure out what's causing her pain, so let's just remove all these body parts. So it was just a lot of education, a lot of leaning into like how this shouldn't be the case, and we deserve more natural, holistic approach. And we launched actually on International Women's Day 2020 with a sold out 200-person launch event where we were talking about shattering the glass ceiling of women's health. So we had about 30 different female founded brands there. The founders spoke on the panel. We had a marketplace. And the next week, everybody went into shutdown because that was the weekend Governor Cuomo announced a state of emergency in New York City. So, it was like the best of times, the worst of times. You can't really predict this stuff. And we had a launch calendar of like 3 months of activations after that we all just had to scrap. But in some ways, I think our launch, for many people, it still reminded them of the last really energizing, empowering event they went to before the world kind of turned upside down, which, I'm very grateful that we were able to have that first launch event, even if the rest of it was about pivoting online.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because I've only had a few brands that launched right at 2020. So, I mean, a new brand launching, that can be scary. They pop stuff. So what did that shift look like? Did you quickly move to e-com? And what did the build out look like for you guys?
Oh my gosh. Not only did we quickly move to e-com, we had to quickly figure out, we were about to go into, I think we were working out of a WeWork or something. And then that closed and we were like doing fulfillment ourselves. We had to move it to one of our homes. And then it was like, we had to quickly find a 3PL during COVID that was deemed an essential service so that they could stay open and continue to ship. And that first year was full of surprises. I think at one point we had a cargo container product get lost at sea, and then it was quarantined in the LA port. Like I felt like every week I would start Monday mornings like, all right, what's going to come at us this week?
Oh my gosh.
But the silver lining is I think because so many people were at home, it was really an opportunity to reflect on like, how am I actually doing? How do I feel in my body? Like I can't be like busy traveling, going to all these things and distracting myself. So I think it actually really forced people to tune in. And those first 3 years, we were growing triple digit year over year. And I think it was as a result of that tuning in, and also because we were fully D2C, and then we shifted all of our community building and all of our organic content to D2C, and organic social has still been a huge driving force of our growth.
Awesome. Love it. So to listeners out there, what does that onboard user experience look like for someone who might be a new customer, for example? So they go on, and you said about 50 questions they take. If you can kind of walk us through them, I'm curious.
Yeah. So you'll come to elixhealing.com, ELIX. And there we have an online health assessment. The first section asks about your different symptoms. The next section asks about your diet, lifestyle, health history. And then at the end of the assessment, you get a result of your pattern diagnosis and also recommendations on an herbal formula that could be best to support your pattern of imbalances. And then in addition, we also have available one-on-one health coaches. We have doctors of Chinese medicine on our team who can walk through nutrition, movement, diet, like lifestyle tips that can support you. And then we also have just like a wonderful resource, our blogs. We have hundreds of blog pieces that really feature an East meets West approach. So we have gynecologist advisors, nutritionists, doctors of Chinese medicine, acupuncturists that talk about all these different topics. And we really try to offer bite-sized tips of things that you could do today to start feeling better.
Yeah, I love it. You can kind of dive into maybe the future of Elix. So you mentioned you kind of gave a teaser that you're going to be onboarding some kind of coaches and consultants. Moving forward, I would love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, so the future, so we've completed today 2 independent clinical studies. We have a roadmap where we are basically implementing additional clinical research. And I think especially during these times when funding towards healthcare and clinical research is a bit uncertain, it's even more important for purpose-driven and mission-driven brands, I think, to step up and fill this gap to support with education and advancement in research. So that's a huge component of it for us. I think there's this misnomer in the holistic and Eastern medicine space that you have to choose. It's either you believe in like healthcare and Western medicine, or you're going the holistic route in Eastern medicine. And we fundamentally believe that the two can work in harmony, and that Eastern medicine is here to supplement the care that you get from your healthcare provider. And Eastern medicine is more focused on chronic, everyday like lifestyle, and helping you feel better in your body, and how do you live with the rhythm of your daily life and the seasons and nature. Like it's very much about bringing more harmony to your body. Like if you wake up in the morning when the sun is up and you feel exhausted, that's not normal. When the sun is up, that's when you're supposed to feel more energized. But if you're going to bed at night and your mind is ruminating, can't fall asleep, that's not normal. So it's like, how do we kind of retool our circadian rhythm is a lot of what we're really passionate about. And that's a lot of what the coaching supports with as well. This like behavioral change, kind of going full circle back to what I originally studied, really passionate about helping people really take that first, second, third step on their long-term health journey.
Love it. Well, Lulu, I like to wrap up each episode with this. Such an amazing story so far. If you can conclude with one piece of advice to an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you learned or regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
I would say it's so important to figure out how you can scale yourself before you scale a company. And what I mean by that is really understanding what gives you energy, what drains you, and how do you build a company knowing with this in mind, because as a founder or as an early founding team member, your energy and your passion, your enthusiasm, that is so important to get you through the inevitable lows, and to make the most of the highs. And I think oftentimes we're so focused in those early days of like learning everything for the business that we don't think about doing a retro on ourselves. And I kind of like to do a monthly retro for myself of like, okay, what am I proud of this month? What could have gone better? What did I learn? What's giving me energy? What's draining? Where should I be more involved, less involved? And I found those, and what do I need for myself energetically? And I found those retros to be really helpful.
I love it. Well, Lulu, thank you so much for taking the time. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out Elix at elixhealing.com.
Thank you, Cameron. And we also created a code starting small 15 for any of your community, 15% off their first order.
Incredible. We'll make sure to attach that in the description too. Thank you, Lulu.